Okay. If you want to tell the first person, essentially you want to go forward on the slide and back on the slide. And if you hit the wrong button, gain control and pop it back up there.
Okay. Sounds good.
Because one of the buttons will actually just kick off, get rid of the whole
So
slide.
do not hit anything except
Try to avoid everything but forward and back.
Left and right.
Got
You
it.
hit the other ones, you said it'll kill the presentation.
Okay, I'm gonna burn that into my brain. welcome everybody. We're going to kick this off in probably 2 or 3 minutes, so stand by. Yeah, why don't y'all take a moment to sign in on the sheet at the table at the entrance there while we're waiting for the presentation to come up. Okay, we're all ready. Welcome, everybody, to the Mississippi Power's 2027 Integrated Resource Plan Initial Public Workshop. And my name's Theron Furr. I'm in resource planning at Mississippi Power. We're going to give a presentation today to kind of stimulate questions and discussion. I brought several presenters with me today, subject matter experts that I want to introduce before we get started. But we intend this to be a kind of an informal discussion, back and forth engagement, lots of questions. So please just break in and, during our presentation at any point with a question. This is going to be live streamed. And I think David Schmidt is going to pass around the microphone. So be sure when you ask your question, wait for the microphone and speak into the microphone so people who are watching this on YouTube will be able to hear your question. And also, as presenters, we need to make sure we're talking into the microphone as well. So let's see. Oh, be sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet. And thinking of other housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started. I introduce myself. I'm Theron Furr with Mississippi Power. Let's start over here with Philip. Philip, would you introduce yourself and what department you work in, what company? Oh, and pass the microphone around. And what I think will be helpful is if we just go around the room and introduce ourselves rather quickly, so we kind of know each other a little bit and can have more of an informal discussion as we go forward.
Hey,
So,
Theron, I
yeah.
suggest that maybe, since all the presenters will be introducing themselves when they get up there, maybe if we have interested parties, that way we know who we're addressing.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, Whit Cox with the Southern Renewable Energy Association.
We're going to start with interested parties. So, any other interested parties? Brent.
Brent Bailey, EPL Advisors. We're not an intervener or anything, but we're certainly an interested party.
Welcome. Thank you. Any other interested parties? Introduce yourself.
Randy Myrick for the Mississippi Public Utility staff.
All right, well, good, thank you. David, would you hold the microphone? And like I said, we're going to, this is the very beginning of our 2027 IRP development cycle. So you're getting in on the ground floor. This is the time to ask questions, give your input, and so we're looking forward to this discussion. We are going to present a set of slides that represents our midpoint supply side update, which we filed about a month ago. And so it does not represent the 2027 IRP, but it's our most recent information. So it kind of, so it's informative to let you know what's the most recent thinking and assumptions that we have had, but it does not represent the inputs and results of the 27 IRP. That is, we're at the ground floor of that, and that will be developed over the next 12 months. So let's see, got a clicker here. Next slide. So as the purpose of this meeting, as I said, is just to have a discussion about the inputs into an IRP, into this IRP, the resource options, and all of our planning assumptions. So we want to show you what those were in our midpoint update, and that might be somewhat similar to what we'll use going forward, but it does not necessarily represent exactly what we're going to use going forward. That's why we're here, to get your input. And I just want to point out some of the major changes since our 2024 IRP. We have signed 2 large customers totaling about 600 megawatts since the 2024 IRP was filed. And we have, to go along to serve those 2 large customers and the rest of our load, we've extended 2 generating units. And you'll hear more about that in the slides. I think Philip's going to present that part. We've also identified significant transmission improvements to support serving those 2 new customers. One other big change since the 2024 IRP is generating technology options. The cost of them has significantly increased, particularly combined cycle technology and simple cycle combustion turbine technology. So Mark will go into that later on in the presentation. So at this time, I'll stop right there. Any initial questions, broad overall questions? All right, yeah.
The 600 megawatts of new load, what's driving that? Like, what is it, a specific large customer or just?
Well, good question. The largest one is a data center, and it's about 500 megawatts, and the other one's a chemical plant, which is about 100 megawatts. And they're going to ramp up over the next probably 12 to 24 months, really 24 to 36 months.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we proceed with the presentation? All right. Well, Justin, I'm going to turn it over to you. Justin is going to present coordinated planning and the IRP process.
Hey, good morning. Hey, I'm Justin Walters. I lead the IRP development team at Southern Company Services. We support the operating companies in the development of their integrated resource plans, which we're going to share with you today, some of the details of that. So let me move forward to coordinated planning. So what is coordinated planning? Coordinated planning is the development, it's the 3 operating companies, Mississippi Power, Alabama Power, and Georgia Power, work together to develop their resource plans together. they combine their loads and resources into a single plan to try and take advantage of operating as a system. By combining these resources into an aggregate pool, we're able to combine our dispatch decisions, combine some of our target reserve margin calculation, and also our capacity planning. So it provides a lot of efficiencies. We get advantages for our customers by doing it this way. Let me give you an example. So when we talk about the diversity of loads, we combine our loads together as a system. And so rather than doing that as an individual operating companies, where we might have a peak that occurs in some given hour, and if you combined each operating company's peak, you would get a number higher than if we look at those peaks as a system. So that diversity is driven by seasonal variability across our footprint. We got weather variability across our footprint, and we also have customer variability across our footprint. So there's an advantage there of combining those loads together, and it allows for our target reserve margins to be lower than if we were to plan individual operating companies by themselves. Another example is with reserve sharing. So if one operating company had additional surplus capacity, that could be available to another operating company that might have a bit of a deficit on a case-by-case basis. And this provides additional economic efficiency and benefit to customers, in that we don't have to go out, each operating company may not have to go out and procure additional resources. They may be able to rely on that pool sharing to address those needs. With all that said, Mississippi Power does make their individual decisions on their own, and the decisions that are made are in the best interest of Mississippi Power's customers. Any questions on this slide on coordinated planning? All right, so I'll move to this slide is a bit of an overview of what you'll be hearing about today. We'll be focusing on the three circles to the left, where we talk about the identification of needs, our assumptions, and the IRP roadmap. So what's in those circles will be, it's a bit of an outline. It's not in the exact order that you'll hear things today, but it is a bit of an outline of today's conversation. So let's start on the left with that needs circle. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So we start with the load forecast that you already heard Theron mention a little bit about. Some of the things that are going into our load forecast today, thinking across our system about what might be changing across our system, what's happening with loads, some of these data centers and large load customers that you're hearing about, that's impacting loads across all of our operating companies. Reliability, you're going to hear Brian Cruz talk about how we establish what our target reserve margins are and how we make sure that we are maintaining reliability for each of our retail operating companies. And then we also incorporate, each year we go through a cycle of reviewing what are our existing resources and what are the resources that we'll be planning to add to our fleet over that long-term planning horizon. In that next box around assumptions, go from top to bottom. Mark Parker is going to tell you a little bit about our technology screening process and what technologies we'll be looking at for our generic roadmap that we produce as part of our the IRP process. You're going to hear Celicia talk about demand side programs and how they're providing advantages, benefits to our customers. And then Charles Rossman will talk about our fuel assumptions that go into our long-term planning, and also the scenario design that we use in our long-term, we plan to use in our long-term planning. And all that results in the generic roadmap, the expansion plan that you'll see. We'll share that with you based on the previous cycle, budget cycle 26. This isn't the B27 budget cycle 2027 integrated resource plan that you will see next year. But this will give you an indication of what we're seeing with that plan, that long-term roadmap. And then just a couple of other things to mention. You know, the generic roadmap helps us develop the avoided energy costs that go into our economic decisions. And then finally, mentioning the transmission plan there. That is an interrelated process that is we conduct in concert with our resource plan, and it helps support our resource plan. So it won't be part of the conversation, an integral part of the conversation today, but it is part of what we evaluate and consider when we're developing these plans. So that last circle over there, that is really focused on the decisions that we make to try and satisfy or to try and make sure we're meeting reliability, having enough resources to meet load in the most economically beneficial manner for our customers. And that may be resource decisions, it may be PPAs, it may be other things that we do to make sure we're providing a reliable system for our customers. Any questions on this slide? All right, Philip, I'll turn it over to you.
Like I said earlier, I'm Philip Warland. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about our current existing system as it is, generating-wise. So this has not really changed a lot from what we presented before. We've got about 3,500 megawatts of generating capacity. As you'll see in the next slide, most of our generation comes from combined cycles, but we still have fossil steam units and CTs as well. So our generating capacity mix is 14% coal and 84% gas. But when we talk about our energy mix, it's actually a little less coal at 10%, and it's a little more gas. And a lot of that is because of the amount of generation we get from CCs. As you can see here, most of our generation is from CCs. It's close to around 70% of our generation. Those are 3 CCs, 2 at Plant Daniel and 1 at Plant Ratcliffe. We still get significant generation from our fossil steam units as well. And you can sort of see that on the bottom. About 20% of our generation is from fossil steam. And then going on to our unit retirement plans. Previously, we had retired all of these units at the end of 2028. Because of these new large load customers, we have made the decision to extend Watson 4 to 2035, and we made a decision to extend Daniel 2 to 2046. Are there any questions on our retirement assumptions?
So when were those decisions made?
We filed that with the Commission in January of 2025. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Next would be Celicia.
Good morning. I'm Celicia Favre. I manage the energy efficiency programs at Mississippi Power, and I'm here to talk about demand-side management and how we address affordability and long-term value to the company and our customers. In the past 5 years, we've addressed baselines, ensuring all of our programs address our customers' needs. The measures are what they need to save the energy that they need at their homes, as well as we've identified some additional opportunities through pilots. Last year and in 2024, we started to think about how we could readdress affordability. In previous years, we had a low-income program that we offered to no cost to our customers. So we wanted to look at how we could change how we looked at affordability, and you'll see that in the next slide. And then as well as addressing affordability needs, we evaluated our programs and processes in 2025. This year and following years, we will address changes in our portfolio, ensuring we address the customer's needs, reestablishing baselines, and making program changes as needed. Customer affordability. So if I look at my team and understand how we can further address customer affordability, I look at it as ease of access to our customers, the right measures for our customers, and the easeability in which they apply for those measures. So last year, we looked at our customer eligibility as it relates to their income. There are other federal and state programs that use 80% AMI, and so we adjusted our programs to address that. And so now if a customer applies for federal programs, they can automatically apply for our low-income program. We expanded our EE programs from a single measure program to a whole home. We started to educate customers about measures that impact their savings. And we initiated a marketplace where customers could do online purchases with an instant discount, ease of access. And then we also launched a mom and pop small business program that customers would receive incentives and measures at no cost. Any questions? So what are we doing to improve? Last year, I wanted to sit back and address our program, the way we process energy efficiency, how we operate it. So we got an evaluator to do a portfolio or process evaluation. They interviewed my team, they interviewed contractors, participants, and customers. They looked at our processes, and they wanted to understand what was the things that customers were looking for, what were the things stopping them from participating. They provided us feedback, and we've made those changes, and we'll incorporate them in future programs. We completed an RFP across Southern Company to centralize energy efficiency, and we were able to gain savings from that. And then we're doing a market potential study, which you'll see on the next slide, that will address future needs of energy efficiency and program changes. This is our market potential study. A lot of people understand it as a TPOT study. And this is our schedule for the year. We do hope to get the final report in the fall, and we will continue to work with our evaluator to make changes to this program year and all future programs. And this is our portfolio for the year. These are our targets and our customers. We will address low-income customers, small businesses, as well as our large and industrial program customers. Sorry. Any questions? Good. All right.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Brian Cruz. I work for SCS System Planning. So our group I'm going to go over 3 topics here with you this morning, kind of complex issues, but kind of try to go slow. If you got any questions, please let me know. So the 3 things I'm going to go over: reserve margin study. So how do we determine the reserve margins for our system? That is a system study, so that is not Mississippi Power only. I'm also going to discuss capacity accreditation. So ELCC values, effective load carrying capability. How do we accredit resources that have energy limitations or intermittency? So think of solar resources, battery resources, things that are not truly dispatchable, that we have an unlimited amount of energy for. Lastly, I'm going to address what we call the solar integration cost, renewable integration study. So what that's looking at is, what are the costs to the system when we integrate solar? So as we know, solar is not a dispatchable resource that we control. We got cloud cover, we've got the sun going across the sky. It can put some strain on our system when that energy goes in and out as the day goes on. Our load is not fluctuating with that, so we have to use resources, traditional dispatchable resources, to kind of address some of that volatility. So to start with our reserve margin study, We perform this study every 3 years. Obviously, like I mentioned, the key here is to determine the target reserve margin study across the entire system, so not just Mississippi Power. There's four primary things that we're looking at here when we do the reserve margin study. First is weather. So we have weather variability. So we know the weather's not always going to be a nice sunshiny day. We're going to have extreme cold. We're going to have extreme hot. We're trying to address those to make sure we have sufficient generation for when those events occur so we can keep the lights on for all the customers. Economic growth. So we know that economics are not always going to be the same across the United States or in Mississippi Power in general, or Mississippi as a state in general. So economics are going to change, so our load targets or our forecasted loads could change with that as well. So we account for any of those variations. Unit performance, so that's looking at generation. So how available are our generators? We know that they're mechanical machines, they're not perfect, they're going to have outages. So we make sure we account for that in our reserve margins as well, so that if we lose a unit, we don't have to immediately turn the lights off. We have some backup in place to help us. And then market purchase. So one thing unique with the reserve margin study is we don't just model our system. We actually hour for hour model the entire 13 of our neighbors, hour for hour with our system, with their generating resources, with their loads, to understand what they would be doing at the same hour that we're operating our system. If there's opportunities to make market purchases inside transmission limits that we have on our system, our model will make those purchases in order to keep costs as low as possible for them. Two primary things we look at with the reserve margin study. We look at cost optimization. So a lot of regions just typically, or a lot of other utilities just look at the reliability factor, but we also consider economics as well. So is there an economic target reserve margin we could have on our system and not just simply look at a reliability number of 1 in 10 LOLE metric, loss of load expectation metric. So we look at both of those. Cost optimization, we're looking at production costs, total system costs of our system, and we're balancing that against capacity costs. Right, so there's production costs to operate our system. Can we install additional capacity to serve that load? Is it too expensive? If not, we may want to make those adjustments. That's what that economic piece is looking at. Reserve margin study is very robust. A lot of inputs go into it. As you can see from call it the rainbow here of inputs. Lots of information. Point out a few things. Forced outages, particularly in cold weather outages. That's something unique we put in our model as well to make sure that we capture any cold weather events. So it's not just the cold weather events, but we also know if it gets down to 0 degrees or colder, our system may struggle. Resources, mechanical machines may struggle when temperatures get cold. So we account for some of those aspects in our modeling. Fuel constraints, so that's something, again, I would say unique. When I talk to other peers, modeling actual fuel constraints at a unit-by-unit level. So we're making sure that we're capturing those fuel constraints. If a resource does not have unlimited fuel, our model accounts for that. The last one there on the far right at the bottom, I'll talk about is the load shapes. So here what we're trying to look at is we model 50 years of historical weather data. So we go back 50 years and say, what was the weather in 1985? What would that, if 1985's weather occurred again today, the cold temperatures that occurred in 1985, how would our system react? How would loads react? What do we think customer loads would look like if 1985 occurred again? So that's some of the key inputs we're looking at there for those 50 weather years. And we do adjust those weather years every 3 years, looking at recent historical or recent customer electrical use patterns. So how much energy are our customers typically using? Obviously, 1985 energy uses doesn't match what it is today. So we have to redo those shapes every 3 years to make sure that we're appropriately capturing those patterns. This one here, I won't go into detail. Basically, it's just another slide to talk about the robustness of the model. So all in, each simulation takes about 550,000 simulations combined. So we run a winter simulation, we run a summer simulation, and we run about a dozen sensitivities. So each one of those simulations is about 550,000 hourly simulations that occur. So a lot of robust, a lot of data that goes into this study to make sure that we can capture all of these risks. The steps for the study, it's fairly simple. So we take our system as built. So what does our system look like today? We kind of pull that system down to roughly about a 20% reserve margin. We run the model. We get production costs. We get reliability at that reserve margin level. And then we incrementally add 1% of reserves. So we'll say run it at 20%, 21%, 22, 23, 24. Every one of those, we pull that production cost data, that reliability data, and then we kind of compare that to see what is the right reserve margin for the system. So this slide here is a lot going on, a lot of technical detail here, but we call this our bathtub curve. So what this is really about is trying to find the economic optimal spot for our target reserve margin. So on the left axis there is total costs. So that combines any production costs, which includes fuel, operating costs, reliability costs. So reliability cost is the cost of unserved energy. So we have a number there that says if we were to not be able to serve, if we were to cut firm load for our customers, there's a cost to the customers for that. So we make assumptions for that in order to minimize the impact of that. We also have import costs. So we buy and sell on the market. Like I said, we're simulating that. And the biggest one there is probably capacity costs. So capacity costs, again, we're weighing all of those costs to the cost to build capacity. So the bathtub curve kind of tells us where that point is that you have an economic optimal, reduced the lowest possible, the reserve margin at the lowest cost. So that's what that EORM number represents. We also have what we call a risk-adjusted number there. So if you think of the bathtub curve at the bottom, you cut kind of a small part at the bathtub curve. Is there a certain amount of, could we get an additional amount of reliability for very little cost? So if you're very bottom part of that bathtub curve, can we increase for very little cost? Can we increase the reserve margin and get a significant, get a lot more reliability out of the system for very little cost? So that's what we're looking at for the risk-adjusted number there. And the last one there is reliability. So talked about economics, but we also have a minimum reliability floor. So pure economics, let's say, for an example, if capacity cost was 1,000 times more than it was today, a pure economic view would say, well, it's okay then, because capacity is so expensive, it's okay to have a load shed event every single day. We know from our customer standpoint, the expectations for safety for our customers, shutting the lights off on a cold winter day, there's a minimum reliability threshold that we need to maintain. So economics cannot be the only driver here. So we want to make sure that we're capturing both of those. So that's what that RM, that 1 in 10-year event comes into play. So that essentially says we will not go below that reliability floor to ensure that we have some minimum level of reliability for our system. And that reliability target we use is the same reliability target that NERC uses, our peer utilities use as well. So we're not out on an island in how we've chosen that number or what target we're going after from a reliability standpoint. So what are the drivers? What's changed from the last study? So the economics are being driven by additional capacity costs. So capacity costs have gone up over 100% between the 21 study and 24 study. So like I said in my example, what does that do? That pushes the economic optimal number down. So it says, well, it's okay to have more load shed on the system. But like I mentioned, we have a reliability floor. The reliability floor, that number has gone up. And why did it go up? The driver for that was driven by Winter Storm Elliott. So in December of 2022, in the Southeast, we had a cold winter event, December around Christmas. Many of you remember Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it was very cold. So that was a new data point that we had in our model that we did not have in the 2021 study. What that showed was we had a lot of our customers, the peaks were being sustained, so energy use was more sustained throughout the day. So we used to have a morning peak, but that peak did not drop off as the day progressed. That energy use stayed high. So that's additional energy burden on the system. And our troughs overnight did not drop either, is what we're used to seeing. So the midnight comes, it's midnight, people are asleep, but people necessarily didn't turn their heat off, let their heat keep running. So again, additional energy burden that was applied that we saw during Winter Storm Elliott. We took the learnings from that and we used that to apply to all the 50 weather years that we look at. So that puts additional upward reliability, upward pressure on the target reserve margin from a reliability basis. So that's the two main drivers there that's driving that. Previously, the economics are what was driving our target reserve margin, but now because of what we've learned from Winter Storm Elliott, reliability is now driving that minimum. So now reliability is we're now maintaining the reliability floor. So that's what's driving our reserve margin targets today. Similar chart here on the summer side. So we run study for the winter, we run a study for the summer. The summer is still looking at kind of the economic view. The economic view is supporting a higher target reserve margin. Prior to 2024, we had a target reserve margin in the summer of 16.25%. We have chosen to increase that to 20%. again, there's two things driving that. One, from the bathtub curve, is telling us that from an economic standpoint, from an economic standpoint, having that higher reserve margin is justified from a production cost, total system cost standpoint. We can justify that higher number. But secondly, probably more important, is the reliability aspect. So I mentioned this loss of load expectation metric. Essentially, we don't want to have a load shed event more than once every 10 years is the target. It's been a lot longer than that, but that's the target that we use for modeling. So we have basically for that one event every 10 years, that's an annual number. So we want to make sure on an annual basis we do not exceed that. So that's a combination of summer and winter because we do seasonal planning. So in 2021, you can see with the 16.25%, which is the orange section, that was our summer. There's a certain amount of loss of load. If you think about staying underneath that red line, the orange represents a certain part of that. The blue represents part of that. For the winter and the summer combined, kept you below that 0.1 and 0.1. What we saw in 2024 was that additional winter reliability risk. So what did that do? That means that still maintaining 26%, it's now taking more of this area underneath that red line, to kind of explain it that way. So we had two options. We could either increase the winter reserve margin or we could increase the summer reserve margin. Each one of those has a cost, but the winter reserve margin would have had a bigger cost on customers. Reason being is winter is typically the season that's driving our capacity needs. Not necessarily Mississippi Power. Mississippi still summer peaking system, but because of that higher reserve margin in the winter does still drive a lot of the capacity procurements. The difference there is typically when you procure capacity in the winter, not all cases, but most of the time, if you had to build a resource in the winter, that resource does not disappear on June 1st when the summer gets here. So that resource is also available in the summertime. So what that translates to is typically our summer reserve margin, our actual reserve margin, is a lot higher than our target, simply because of the build that we have to do in the wintertime. That creates that difference there. So saying all that, it was less of a cost to the customers, essentially zero cost in the immediate term for Mississippi Power to increase the summer reserve margin. Comparatively, if we had increased the winter reserve margin, there might have been a more immediate cost. Maybe not necessarily Mississippi, but in the other sister companies as well. So that's the decision we made. Again, the idea there is to maintain reliability. So we are maintaining by changing the summer instead of the winter, which the goal there is to maintain the annual reliability, essentially below that red line. So in summary for the reserve margin, 26%, we're holding with the same number we had in 2021, 2024. In the summertime, we're moving that up from 16.25 to 20%. Now, one of the advantages of Mississippi Power being a member of the pool, the Southern Company pool, is that there's some diversity benefits. So as I mentioned, the reserve margin study is performed at a system level, so we look at a system peak. However, we know that the partners in the pool don't necessarily have a concurrent peak that occurs in the exact same hours. Because of that, there's a diversity benefit that comes with being a member of the pool. Because of that, the reserve margin that Mississippi Power targets to actually meet their load plus reserves is actually lower than 26%. So that's one of the advantages of being a partner in the pool for Mississippi Power and for their customers. All right, any questions on reserve margin? Kind of complex there, but yep.
So I have a question. I think you mentioned this at the beginning. So about the solar integration charge. Did you mention that or solar integration cost?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is currently?
That's coming up.
Or was that the next?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wait then.
Yeah,
Okay,
fine.
thank you.
Yeah. So capacity equivalence. So this is, like I mentioned, the capacity accreditation. So think of solar, wind, battery resources that are non-dispatchable or have energy limitations. So the idea here is to determine what that capacity value is for those resources. So we use the effective load carrying capability for our modeling at Southern Company. Measures the amount of reliable capacity. For those that aren't familiar, capacity a resource provides to the system, reflecting how much the system's load it can support while maintaining a specified load of reliability. So what we're essentially doing here is we're trying to say, if I have a solar resource that's 100 megawatts, if I had a CT that was 100 megawatts, how do I compare those two to make sure that they're on an even playing field, considering a CT is fully dispatchable potentially available 24 hours a day, but then we know like a solar resource, there's some limitations there. Lots of energy value, but there's some dispatch limitations if we need to serve energy in the middle of the night, for example. So we want to find a fair way to evaluate these resources and put them against each other, make sure that we're capturing any of those differences there. We also use historical weather patterns for each of these. So when we do solar, we're not just looking at a generic profile for that solar. We look at 50 weather years of that solar profile. So in other words, in 1985, we say, what is the solar? What would it have produced in 1985, hour for hour, with the load that we think that we would have in our system at the same weather conditions. So we're capturing all of that. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we do use the Serva model. Those aren't familiar. The PowerGem is a company that licenses that software. It's used across the industry. So the Serva model we use for our reserve margin, ELCC, and the integration study, which I'll address here in a minute. So we use the same model, same database for all of these studies for consistency. So existing ELCC capacity values. So this is the current ELCC capacity values for Mississippi Power's solar resources. So what you might notice there in the summer, those values kind of move around a little bit. The reason for that is we do a tranche type of arrangement. When we have a bunch of solar resources across the southern system, I mean, we're talking 30, 40, 50 solar resources, some of them very small, some of them a lot bigger. In order to model that without spending weeks and weeks and weeks modeling little tiny resources, we tranche them together in roughly 1,000 megawatt tranches. So we'll say, who was the first 1,000 megawatts of solar on the Southern Company system? They get grouped together. It's not looked at by state. It's really looked at by commercial operating date. So you could have a few of those resources in Mississippi. You could have some of those in Georgia and Alabama across the system. And we evaluate those as a group, as one large tranche. There's differences in each of those. Each of our solar sites has its own, it's tied to an actual city. So each solar site is tied to a city, and each city has its own profile. So there's a lot of detail that goes into there. Then obviously you also have inverter ratings as well that could be different between these different resources. So different solar resources could have more output at the same solar irradiance. So all of that goes into play. So we have different tranches. Currently we have 4 tranches, 3 or 4. We have 4 tranches, and we're currently working on the 5th. Each one of those is roughly 1,000 megawatts. So that kind of explains why some of those are different between those different resources. Each of those resources could be in different tranches. So they don't necessarily move in tandem with each other because of the different resources. We do know that, and this is not unique to Southern Company, as you add more solar, the incremental value of that solar drops over time. So that's why some of those changes. Expansion resources. So current for expansion planning, we use solar. The current ELCC value is 0% in the winter, 25% in the summer. Battery, 25 in the winter, 35 in the summer, and then southeast wind. I will say the solar, there's something unique with the solar. So these values here are used for generic expansion planning. So generic expansion planning, we look and say, what is the next, let's say, 10,000 megawatts of solar? So we average that together. That averages down to 1 or 2%. We rounded that to 0. So very little value. However, that is not the value we would use if we were actually procuring solar today. So if we would say what's the next 100 megawatts of solar worth? We look at that next 100 megawatts. We're not actually saying it's part of the 10,000 megawatt tranche. Going back to the 1,000 megawatt, the tranches I described a few minutes ago. So all that to say, if we were to procure another solar site today, its capacity value would not necessarily be 0%. It'd probably be closer to 10 or 11% in the winter season that gets a lot of attention. Battery values seem kind of low there as well. So some people might say, why are the battery values so low? Some of our other partners, other operating companies in the system have procured a lot of battery recently. So again, like solar, the more battery in our system, saturation occurs, and each increment, the capacity value drops over time. So a lot of batteries procured from at another operating company. So we're looking at the next incremental battery on our system has these lower values if we were to procure another battery, the next battery. And then I'll add the last one there, southeast wind. That's something new we did not have last time. So we worked with NREL to get us southeast wind profiles. This is tall tower wind. So we have profiles for those. Again, it's a 50-year profile. We model those in our system. So what would wind, what kind of capacity value could we expect from wind in our southeast footprint? Okay, any questions? Yep.
I'm curious on the expansion resources. I don't see, I mean, I just see, renewables there. Does that mean you're not considering like gas as expansion resources or is that in a different slide for the,
Yeah, so for ELCC, so something, not everyone does this, but we look at, when we run our ELCC values, we do not run ELCCs on any thermal resources that are dispatchable. So somebody will say, why not? That resource is not perfect. So one thing I'll add, when we run ELCCs for any renewable resources, we also consider those perfect as well. In other words, no solar, no battery, wind, all of that is considered perfect from the standpoint it does not have any outages tied to it. So to keep it on a level playing field, the ELCC is really just looking at the dispatchability and energy limitations of those resources. So when we're comparing it to thermal, we want to make sure that we're treating them comparison apples to apples. So in the ledger, thermal resources get accredited with their essentially their nameplate, their nominal value. The solar gets credited with essentially its nameplate with just these ELCCs applied that do not account for forced outage. In other words, all that to say, if we put forced outages in these values, they'd be even lower than what they are today.
okay. And one follow-up question. So for the existing resources, and you may have covered this already, but I see the solar, MS Solar 2 mentioned. What, the other three resources, what, are those solar or what type of resources are those?
Yes, those are solar.
Okay. They're all solar. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. All right. Last one here, renewable integration study. So this is our second round at doing the integration study. Second time we've done it. We've run the study every 3 years. We do not run the study in-house. We do use the Servum model. We're using our database, but we get PowerGem, again, as the licensor of the Servum software to run this for us. Reason being is it's a 5-minute study. Our other studies are hourly, so we're not typically used to running 5-minute intra-hour studies, so we get them to perform this for us because they have more expertise in running those types of studies. So what this is looking at is the volatility. What's the volatility cost of solar on our system? So we add solar, there's volatility associated with that. In order to address that, typically we have to have dispatchable resources that can address that volatility. So if solar immediately drops off the system, if load doesn't follow, which typically it wouldn't, especially as you look at the wide footprint of our system, we'd have to have resources that are going to have to ramp up to cover that volatility, and there's a cost for that. So that's what we're trying to tease out of this study is what are those costs for the system of integrating solar. The simulation itself is fairly simple. We take our system, we remove all the solar from the system, and we kind of calibrate it to a base level of reliability, and then we incrementally add different tranches of solar. So we'll add 1,000 megawatts of solar, and then we'll look and say, did reliability change on the system? If it did, what we'll do is incrementally increase what we call load following reserves. So you can think of that as operating reserves. So spinning reserves, resources that can immediately respond within a 5-minute window. So we'll incrementally add those resources to the system in order so that we get back to our base level of reliability. Once we do that, then it's just a simple math equation. We just say, what was the additional cost of having those additional committed resources? What was that cost? Divide that by the amount of megawatt hours that the solar produced that we added to the system. Do that math, and then you kind of break that down to $1 per megawatt hour cost of dispatching that solar or having that solar on the system. We do that multiple times, multiple tranches of solar, so multiple as we get bigger and bigger in solar, and then we'll see kind of this pattern play out right here. So essentially, as we add more solar to the system, so solar is now on the x-axis, y-axis is that integration cost, $1 per megawatt hour. As we add solar to the system, those costs increase over time. So one thing unique that we changed from the last study to this study, the last study we had a big, large swath of solar that we added at one time. So we said, what's the cost of 10,000 megawatts of solar? What's the cost of the next 5,000 and so on? But we don't procure 5,000 megawatts of solar at a time. We procure a lot less. So we actually had PowerGem reduce that to 100 megawatt increments. So what's the cost of the next 100 megawatts of solar instead of looking at those large tranches. So with that said, we can now plug in, they gave us a tool, we can now plug in what's the current solar today that we have on the system. So in this case, it's 4,160 megawatts of solar. And then we can say, from that point, what is the next integration cost for the next 100 megawatts of solar? So when we're doing evaluations of procuring more solar, we can kind of include that cost in any of those studies. So in this case, at 4,000 megawatts, that cost is now $2.40 per megawatt hour. So that's the current incremental cost that we're using at this time. As I mentioned, we've adjusted the study a little bit. In 2021, the study, that cost was $3. Again, that was for a large tranche swath of solar. So kind of tuning that up a little bit. So now that cost is down to $2.40. So it is dropped a lot there. Some patterns with that. Both studies indicate the cost will increase over time. So that upward and to the right trend continues for both studies. And then lastly, I'll say Mississippi Power has incorporated these costs into three filings: the annual avoided cost filings, net metering rates, and qualifying facility rates is where these costs are currently being applied. So, did that answer?
That's good. Another question or two, thanks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was curious about that, and so on a related note, I know recently, I believe Georgia Power made a filing to decrease their solar integration costs from like down to zero, and I believe the commission approved it, and the staff explained that it was because they were adding a bunch of batteries, and that allowed there to not be a solar integration cost. So I was curious, does will the IRP, consider factor in, if you're proposing to add more battery storage that could reduce the solar cost, or how does that, how much battery storage do you have currently? Is that, because I guess when I saw the initial chart, the other was, I'm assuming other would include solar and battery storage. So it looked like it wasn't very much. Sorry, that's probably multiple questions.
Yeah,
but-
yeah, I understand what you're asking there. So,
Let me just clarify. Are you asking basically how does this change of cost influence your future IRP and your expansion plan?
I think so. And I guess without considering the batteries, I would have assumed that maybe the integration costs would be higher for Georgia Power, because my understanding is they have more solar. And I think you were saying the integration costs would increase as you add more solar, if I'm understanding that correctly. So I was just kind of wanting to clarify, I guess, why it's higher now, given that Mississippi Power has less current solar, and how would adding, batteries impact that?
So there's a couple things I'll say first. So the system, it is a system study that we've run, so it's not Mississippi only for this study. So we do look at solar across the system and treat it as system solar, as system battery. One thing that the study does show us, even when we kind of remove the impacts of storage in general, there is a cost to integrating solar regardless. We do have batteries can potentially mitigate that cost down. We do apply that to any batteries in the form of a benefit to the batteries. So if we were to procure batteries, those batteries would show a benefit as they're procured. So that's a benefit that goes to the battery in order to say justify. But with the cost, when we look at the cost of procuring that battery, that goes with that. Now the IRP, I don't know, is that cost being applied, or it was applied in this IRP run? Is that correct? The integration cost is in there. Look at the IRP team to help.
Hey, sorry, Whit, you can see me. You and I are on each side of the column here. Hey, Randy Hubbard with System Planning. So Brian mentioned how we're incorporating the renewable integration study results into the actual capacity expansion modeling. Historically, we have included a renewable integration cost for solar. And as the system mix evolves over time, as you've noted that there's a lot of battery now being committed to and planned for our system, we reevaluate this every year. And since we're also looking at 30-plus years in our planning horizon, it is a cost that we're reevaluating, and I think we actually took it out of the capacity expansion for this B26. But it's something we reevaluate with every planning cycle.
Is that? Okay, okay. All right. That was end of my section. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, let's take a 15-minute break and be back here at 10:15. You jinx it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Now, Charles Rossman with Southern Company Services is going to go over our scenario development process. Charles?
Great. Thanks very much, Theron. Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Rossman. I'm with SCS Resource Planning. And Brian talked with you before about some of the ways we deal with uncertainty, one of which was, weather uncertainty or unit outage uncertainty. I'm here to talk about a different set of uncertainty in the way we try to handle it in planning. And that is by constructing some scenarios of how the future could unfold. So I have a few minutes here to talk with you. One of the items, I'll talk a little bit about the scenario development process itself, a little bit about our 9 planning scenarios, and the uncertainties that we build those scenarios around. They have to do with future CO2 pressure, future technology cost and performance uncertainty, future load growth uncertainty, and future fuel prices. And then I'll talk a little bit in detail about each of those, the 4 views we have of CO2 pressure, the 2 views of future technology cost and performance, the 3 views of future technology, future load growth, and the 3 views of future fuel prices. Actually, the technology cost and performance thing will be done by Mark, so he'll come up and talk about that, and then I'll come back and do the rest. We do an annual refresh of our scenario design process. So each year we get to rethink about what the important uncertainties are and how we would reflect them in scenarios that are, the scenarios are sort of key sets of assumptions that go into our modeling analyses. Each year we begin by thinking about which are the impactful areas of uncertainty, and in each area, if something is impactful and uncertain, what are the different views we should entertain or consider about it? And then we assemble these views into a set of scenarios that we then do our analyses in. The 4 areas, as I mentioned, that have been the ones that we treat this way are the future pressure on CO2 emissions for the generating fleet, the technology cost and performance of new technologies that we could add to the fleet going forward, the way that load grows over the planning period, and the fuel prices that we are expected to pay over the planning period. The planning period is typically 20, 30 years, and over that time frame, we consider several different ways in which each of these areas could evolve. This slide shows that gives labels. I'll say a little bit more about each of these in a moment, but gives labels for the 4 different views of future CO2 pressure that we consider: a lower, a moderate, a higher, and an emissions limit view. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about each of them shortly. Technology cost and performance. Mark will talk about this, about the views we have on technologies and technology cost and performance. Again, for the modeling, we have 2 different views that we consider, chiefly having to do with the way in which we observe the tax credits available for some resources. With regard to load growth, we have 3 different views of the way that load could evolve. One of them is the standard view, which is the official company load forecast. I'll say a little bit about how we assemble that, not a whole lot, but the idea here is that we also entertain 2 different views: an alternative view that load growth is higher and a view that load growth is lower. than our standard view. And similarly in fuel prices, 3 different views, a standard view, a moderate view, and then a higher and a lower view. And I'll say a little bit about where they come from. Questions here? Okay. These are our 9 scenarios that were part of the B26 process, which supports the midpoint update. Again, I think as has been mentioned earlier, we are currently in the process of constructing the B27 analyses that will support the IRP when it's filed next year. These, if we were to take all of the 4 views on CO2 pressure and all of the 3 views on load and fuel and the 2 views on technology, cost, and performance, and analyze them all, that would be 4 times 3 times 3 times 2, which is too big a number. And so we don't do that. Instead, we choose a set that are intended to be helpful and meaningful and not duplicative, and give a broad view of the kinds of pressures that the fleet is subjected to over the planning horizon. And so that's what these 9 are intended to do. I'll say a little bit about what's going on here because the labels in the far right column will show up again on the last slide in our slide deck here. And so I'll say a little bit about what those things are so that when Justin talks a bit about them, that it won't be completely fresh. So the first 3 scenarios are ones that differ in the fuel price assumptions that we have, the moderate, the lower, and the higher there. And the labels are L, G0, MG0, and HG0, signifying the difference in the fuel price view, the natural gas price view that we're taking. Scenario 5 is different in the way that it treats the tax credits going forward. And so its label is MG0 with the extended tax credits. Scenarios 5 and 6 are ones that deal with the differences in the view that the way that load may evolve. LL is the one that has the lower load view, and HL is the one that has the higher load view. Scenario 7, 7, 8, and 9 differ in the way that they treat CO2 pressure over the planning period. MC is moderate CO2 pressure. HC is higher CO2 pressure, and the EL is the emissions limit view. And I'll say a little bit more about each of those in a moment. Questions here? All right. CO2 pressure views. This is a little bit more about the CO2 pressure views. In the lower view, we have, in the B26 version, a little bit of CO2 pressure that is applied. There is not a CO2 price, but instead there is a limit on the capacity factor that new resources can take at some point in the future. This is part of the way that we expect the Clean Air Act's requirements to evolve. And so while that year is uncertain, in the lower view, we take a later view of the year in which either a CO2, either a capacity factor limit for some new resources, or as an option that it might retrofit with CCS at some point, be required to do that. Be built with CCS at some point in the future, and those dates are given here. In the moderate view, that kind of non-price pressure is there also with the dates given here, but also there is a CO2 fee that begins at the date given here. And in the higher view, the capacity factor limitation and or CCS and a CO2 price. In addition, what's added here is that some existing resources would be subjected to the capacity factor limits also. Questions here on what, EL is not listed here. It does not have these kinds of pressure. Instead, it is a trajectory of the tons per year that the fleet is limited to as time evolves, and so it does not have either of these kinds of pressures, but instead a ton limit that the fleet, a declining ton limit that the fleet must meet. Questions here? Here is an illustration of those CO2 fees that I mentioned in the moderate and the higher case. The lower, again, has zero CO2 fee. Each of those streams grows over time in real value. The moderate grows at 5% above inflation, and the higher grows at 7% above inflation. So that's what we mean by each of those labels. Questions here? Mark?
Thanks, Charles. Hi, good morning. I'm Mark Parker. I work in SCS System Planning Generation Development, and I'm going to talk about our technology, cost, and performance assumptions serving the new resource assumptions in the generic expansion plan. So first, to establish the assumptions about new technology, cost, and performance, we need to identify the technologies to provide in the expansion plan modeling exercise. This is done through a systematic screening approach with internal technical subject matter experts. The first step is really a broad view of generation and energy storage technology in the power generation space. The experts will identify and really create a working definition for everything that we're able to identify collectively. After that, the working group will go through a first cut qualitative screen based on the broad categories of those like technical viability, safety, environmental compliance, commercialization, or a viable commercial pathway. That will reduce the number of technologies remaining in the screening process. We commonly say those that are retained, and then those that are retained will go through a second qualitative screening process, and a more detailed evaluation will take place at that point, looking at again technical aspects, but it will really focus on uncertainties, viability in the specific region in which the three operating companies, including Mississippi Power, operate, and it will take a finer look at environmental compliance and overall constructability, deployability. The last step will be a more quantitative screening process in which the group will build up cost estimates, both capital and O&M. The group will go through engineering exercises to establish a generic performance baseline, for instance, heat rate for thermal resources, round-trip efficiency, or annual capacity factors for renewable resources. And then we'll perform preliminary life cycle cost analysis before it culminates in the IRP roadmap generic expansion plan, which is truly the final quantitative analysis. For B26, the resources that were ultimately retained at the end of the entire screening process include uh, include the thermal resources you see, simple cycle and combined cycle, renewable resources, wind and solar, and lithium-ion battery-based energy storage. For those technologies labeled here as ready for near-term deployment, that's as in we already see them operating in our region of the country or generally or widely in the power industry in North America. Then another category of resources were available in the generic expansion plan exercise known as long-term potential. And those are technologies that may not be ready for immediate development or may have a very long development lead time, but the technology working group and the IRP group identified as still potentially meaningful pending results of the IRP for the generic expansion plan. Any questions so far? Yes.
Thanks. Just a question about the batteries. So for near term batteries, what duration are you assuming for, say, the ready for deployment versus the medium and long duration that's potential?
For what was ultimately retained, 4-hour duration battery storage is what was used in B26.
Thanks.
No problem. And Charles mentioned the two different technology views. The standard view assumes the change in law from last year, essentially, and specifically with regard to tax credit for the technologies that are listed here, the timing and the amounts of those tax credits. Then the extended view assumes that there's no expiration or phase out of those tax credits. And as Theron mentioned at the beginning of the workshop today, the biggest change in the technology cost and performance set of assumptions has been in the upfront capital cost of combined cycles and CTs in particular, that we've seen upward pressure on the capital cost of generating technologies across the board. It's been the most pronounced for CCs and simple cycle CTs because demand has just grown for both gas turbines and the engineering, procurement, and construction companies that are able to deploy them just at an unprecedented rate. The supply of gas turbines, the number of suppliers, and the firms that are capable of safely and with high quality deploying these projects have struggled to keep up with demand both regionally, nationally, and globally. Other factors are increases in labor costs, both in manufacturing and construction. Then generally balance of plant equipment costs have risen for a variety of factors depending on which component, but transformers are one noticeable balance of plant component common across generation types that we've seen significant cost increases in. Again, the primary drivers are the gas turbines themselves and the few EPC contractors that are actually qualified to build large CT and combined cycle plants. Any questions before I turn it back over to Charles? Okay, IT.
All right. Thanks, Mark. And hello again. So just a little roadmap. In the scenario design, we have 4 different things that are uncertain. I talked a little bit about CO2 before. Mark talked a little bit about the components of our views on technology, cost, and performance. And now I'm back to talk a little bit about the way that our views on load flow over the modeling period and fuel costs. So this is an illustration of the many components that go into the assembly of load forecast. I'm not going to talk in detail about that. The official Mississippi Power load forecast has many components that go into it. Many of them are described here in the green boxes. The important thing for the analytical part is the thing that's in the items in the blue boxes on the right, which are 2 different, the standard view and then two alternatives. One, a view of higher load growth, and one, a view of lower load growth. The higher load growth, the idea is that some of the load growth that we've been seeing in large loads over the past few years may continue for not just the 5 or so years that we have sight on now, but what if that is not a temporary thing and lasts for several years longer? And so that's what motivates the higher view. The lower view is motivated by the idea that, hey, maybe these large load customers especially have a delayed implementation, a delay relative to what we're currently thinking, and that the load growth is a bit lower and a bit more drawn out. So that's what motivates the load views here. Here's an illustration of them for Mississippi Power. I should mention that I'm not sure that anyone has mentioned or emphasized this, but the analysis that we do, I guess it has been said, the analysis that we do is for the entire fleet. And so the growth of the way that the fleet is built and evaluated is the sum of the operating company components, and that's done together. This view here is for the Mississippi Power components of that higher and lower load views. Questions here? The last topic is natural gas prices. This is an illustration of our 3 views on how natural gas prices might evolve over this planning period. We adopt we have adopted for B26 as our view of the moderate view, the reference case from the U.S. Energy Information Administration's annual energy outlook, and that is our moderate view for the long-term price. We adopt one of their other scenarios as our view of higher prices. That is their view for the low oil and gas supply availability case yields higher prices of natural gas and oil. That's our higher view. And then the lower view is the more generous view that they have about the supply of oil and natural gas over this planning period, and that yields lower prices. That's the lower view. That's our long-term view. The historical record is to the left for a bit of context, but the 2 slices in the middle there are the way that we handle short-term natural gas price forecasting, which is a bit different. Instead of adopting the AEO's views here, We use the closing prices from the prices for future contracts for natural gas delivery as reported on the New York Mercantile Exchange, and use some arithmetic on those prices in order to get a short-term forecast. And then that interpolation bar is we have a short-term, and then we've got the long-term AEO, the AEO component, and they get blended into each other in that 2-year period. So that's how we do the natural gas prices that support the analysis that went into the supporting the midpoint update. Questions on that? All right, I'll conclude. Thanks.
All right, up until now, we've heard a lot about inputs into the IRP process. So the needs assessment is the first step in actually analyzing those inputs. And it's simply to determine over the 20-year planning period, do we have enough resources to reliably serve the load? And if not, is there a point at which we don't have enough? And when is that? And how much do we need to add? What year do we need to add it? And the way we do that is this might look like a complicated graph, but it's very simple. We start out with the load forecast, and we add the target reserve margin on top of that load forecast that Brian, where's Brian? Brian talked about earlier. So so the red line is load plus reserves. So that red line represents what we need to have, what the amount of resources, the amount of generating capacity that we need to have to reliably serve the load over the 20-year planning period. The blue line represents how much capacity, generating capacity, we expect to have or project to have over that same 20-year period. So if the blue line is above the red line, that means we're good. We have enough or a little bit more generating capacity than we need to reliably serve the load. And what you can see here in this graph, and this is from our midpoint update, and it doesn't represent our 2027 IRP, but it could be similar to this. It shows that we are at or above the target reserve margin level all the way to 2036. And at that point, you can see the blue line drops below the red line. That means that's the year, 2036, that we project that we will have to add some sort of resources in order to be able to continue to serve the load reliably. Now, one thing I want you to bear in mind is that we don't just wait until 2036 to decide what to do there. You know, any generating technology that we decide to put in there, you know, including, you know, the construction, the design, going all the way back to identifying resource technology decision and approval and all that stuff, that's a matter of years. So there's years of lead time no matter what we decide to do in 2036. And so keep that in mind. Any questions about this? All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Justin to talk about generic expansion plan modeling.
Careful. All right, thank you, Theron. So we'll talk a little bit about the generic expansion planning here. So this diagram that you're looking at is kind of lays out all of these inputs that you've been hearing about that have been described by other presenters that flow into our optimization model. The long-term capacity expansion and production cost model that we utilize is the Aurora model, and we are able to put in all of these different assumptions, and it produces an optimized mix of resources to address those capacity needs that Theron was talking about. And that's where we get our generic expansion plan. We run that for each of the 9 scenarios that Charles described. And so let's just, rather than me going through each of these boxes that you've already heard about, let's look at the expansion plan. So I've got a picture of it here. One thing I'll point out is, well, first let me orient you to this slide. The first three are the gas focused scenarios that Charles mentioned. And then there's the tax credit MG0TX. The two different load views, LL and HL, and then the higher carbon pressure, so moderate carbon, higher carbon pressure, and then EL. So one thing to point out from this slide is, across scenarios, we see a diverse mix of resources. We see that the combined cycles are important in one way or another across all scenarios to address the capacity and energy needs that we see over the planning horizon, over this 20-year horizon. And just as a reminder, this is from B26. We see that renewables in the form of solar and wind are beneficial to help address or help mitigate risk from gas prices, so in the high gas price, or from carbon pressure. We see those renewables showing up in the carbon pressure scenarios. We also see nuclear and CC with CCS showing up in those two really much higher carbon pressure scenarios. So all in all, a really, across these scenarios, it's a broad and diverse generation mix. So any questions about the generic expansion plan? All right. I think that's our last slide there.
All right, that's the extent of our presentation. We've got plenty of time for questions and answers. Any discussion, questions, comments? Yeah, Whit?
Thanks. Just curious, so will this presentation be available to look at after this? Publicly?
Yes,
Okay.
I think we're going to email it to you. Or,
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to email it. Ben, we'll email it to you.
Okay, thanks. And also I know there's a live stream. Will the video of the live stream, like, can I go back and watch that, or okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. No, no.
You should be able to go back and watch the whole thing on YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Brent Bailey, I know I'm
Brent.
not an intervener, but hopefully with plenty of time, just a couple questions.
Very welcome
Came up
to
there,
be
if you
here.
don't mind. Let's see, get back to where it was. So, Mr. Phillip, hey, you talked about the generation mix and type of units that are out there. I don't know if you can go back to the slide or if that's going to be a big inconvenience to you guys on the list there. But just wondering if you could discuss which ones are of the generation mix, which one are combustion turbines, which one are combined cycles,
Yeah.
which ones are the legacy units.
Go all the way back here.
Yeah, I know that gets you pretty far back, and I apologize.
Well, that's all right. Get to see everything again. So from this slide,
Yes, sir.
so SWET is a simple cycle CT. It's an aeroderivative CT. Watson has two fossil steam units, Watson 4 and 5. Those are gas steam units. And another aeroderivative CT at Watson. Greene County, we own 40% of. Those are gas steam units. The Chevron Cogen are 5 CTs. Daniel has Daniel 2 coal and Daniel 3 and 4 as the combined cycles. Ratcliffe is 1 combined cycle. And the Walnut Grove is a solar BESS demonstration project. Plus, we have the 4 solar PPAs.
Yeah. Can you comment on the capacity factors of the various units today? I know in the past is a little different, but today in 2026, what does capacity factor look like for each of those?
So for the CTs, very low capacity factors on the CT, the really peaking resources. For the combined cycle, we expect those to be somewhere between 70 and 95%, depending on the unit. For the gas steam units and the fossil steam units, just all the fossil steam units, we're expecting somewhere a little south of 50%. So they're not going to run base load like the CCs do. But we do see a significant capacity factor for those units as well. And the cogen just runs all the time.
And I know in this slide, you don't mention the age of the various units,
I-
and I don't know if you will in the
Yeah.
report or not. I've seen other, public documents that talk about the years they went in service. And given the extension of a couple of these units, the extended life of those, any expected, significant upgrades or cost in O and Ms that would be factored into decision factors of, you know, maintaining the existing fleet versus investing in new generation to meet growth going forward.
I can answer that. Yeah.
So I think in the, in one of the appendices in our filing, there's a economic, results of an economic study where you actually looked at kind of that new versus existing.
Mhm.
And you saw the price increases of new units. So it would be what you'd expect. You know, they have remaining significant value.
Yeah, and we continue, you know, whenever we make decisions to extend a unit, we're taking into account the expected maintenance of that unit compared to a new resource. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate doing that.
Thanks, Brent and Philip. Any other
Alright.
questions?
I had a couple there. If we got
Yeah.
a little time, if that's all right with you guys.
Yeah, oh, we got
Y'all
plenty of
sh-
time.
Y'all shut me down anytime. It doesn't matter. I know I'm not an intervener, but I just had a couple questions I thought would be interested. I guess Mr. Parker was talking about the reserve margins.
Mhm.
And,
Brian Cruz, yeah.
oh, Brian, okay, Brian was talking, I'm sorry. I wrote it down wrong. How have those changed since 2020? Since the IRP process has really started?
Yeah.
Since the IRP rule went into effect and the analysis were done?
Brian, you want to
Um,
come up here and address that? I mean, I could probably give you an answer, but he can give you a better answer.
Yeah, so you're talking about the actual number, like the
Mhm.
2620. So the 26% has been in place ever since the company went to seasonal planning, which I think was 2018. So prior to that, I think we had a set annual number that was roughly, I don't know what that exact number was, but 15% maybe, somewhere in that range. Seasonal planning, we saw additional summer or winter risk. So that's why we determined we needed some additional reserves in the winter. The summer was established, I don't remember the exact number, back to 2018, but the 16% came into play. It's been 16% ever since essentially 2018. This was the first time we've moved that reserve margin for the summer.
Okay. Well, I appreciate, so the reserve margin requirement has remained fairly steady.
That's right.
Has reserve margin itself varied over that time? Has it shrunk or grown?
So you're referring to like the actual
Mhm.
reserves?
Yes,
So I
sir.
probably have to default to IRP group.
So back in 2018, the commission, you probably remember this very well, commission started the reserve margin docket and asked us to address our reserve margin because we had a high reserve margin due to various circumstances. And, called on us to come up with a plan to reduce, I think it was 950 megawatts of generating capacity. So I can't remember what the actual reserve margin, it may have been in the 40s, something like that. And so it's come way down since then. We've retired a few small units. Some of our off-system capacity sales have terminated since then. And so it's come down quite a bit. And now our load is starting to rise or projected to rise. And so that makes it smaller as well.
Just real quick on the reserve margin considerations in developing those model inputs. I think there's about 13 different indicators up there. Do any of those are weighted differently than the others?
So most of those are weighted equally. There's not really a weighting. Well, let me back up. The inputs that go in there, so we look at generation outages. So those are all weighted equally based on historical data. The weather data, the 50 years of historical, those are all weighted equally. There's been discussion in the past, previously, prior to this study, we actually continually added weather years over time. So we actually would have been up to 61 weather years that we were continually adding. We thought at some point, first, every time we add weather year, that's more simulation time that we have to run for every simulation. But then also it saturates. Every time we add new weather years and we don't remove old weather years, we're now saturating everything. And pretty soon you're just going to have new events are going to have less input. So going with 2024, we decided to move to a rolling 50-year. So then now every 3 years, we will cut off the oldest 3 years and we'll add the 3 newest years. That way, over time, if there are changes in climate, we will capture that over time. The other one that is not weighted equally is the load forecast error. So we do have essentially a bell curve of load forecast error. We have a load forecast that is published, that the company publishes. We also know we likely going to miss our forecast, right? We're going to miss that forecast. So we use some economic EIA analysis, publicly available analysis, to determine what kind of a bell curve, how plus or minus that forecast may be based on economics looking in the near future. So there's a bell curve based on that. So it's not equally weighted. Most of the weighting is in the median top of that bell curve, but there is some tails in there that capture some of that. Everything else is essentially weighted equally.
So as we look at the capacity needs going forward, y'all mentioned the cost of the capacity cost increase, the cost of new generation, and I know I think you mentioned that, relying somewhat on the Southern Company pool as part of that resource adequacy or the reserve margin mix. I guess given the increased risk that we're seeing, particularly in Georgia, the significant load growth ramping up over there, and I know they're trying to accelerate their bailout to meet that. Are there additional risks that Mississippi Power may need to consider given that significant ramp up in change in load growth demand over in that part of the system? And does that impact planning?
I would say there's not a big impact there, simply because Georgia Power also has to meet the pool target reserve margins for their loads as well.
Okay.
So if they want to bring 10,000 more megawatts of load to the system, they're going to have to bring 10,000 plus 26%. So they're having to bring resources to meet that as well. Speak off the cuff a little bit, there could be advantages, right? So if they don't need all this, they're bringing new resources that are cheaper, that are more efficient. So being a pool participant, Mississippi Power customers during low load times might participate in getting some of that cheaper energy as well. So there's some benefits there too.
Okay, appreciate it. I saw you look at me. Okay.
I just want to add that, the sharing is for temporary deficits and surpluses between the operating companies. It's not like we're going to plan to lean on the system for 5 years or something like that. That's not the way it works.
So kind of building on that, is there any opportunity or plans to share or lean on adjacent systems, outside the Southern Company pool, not really into CERTEP, but I know that's kind of more reliability region, but are there opportunities potentially as load growth varies across the region, whether that's interregional connections or other, purchase opportunities? Is any of that on the horizon?
Yeah, we look at all options, including purchases. Right, we have a group that looks at exactly that all the time, whether it's selling or buying, and so we definitely consider those.
If you look at the needs assessment, our needs are further out in time, so it's not really an immediate issue for us.
I think I got one more, Mr. Charles. I was going to ask Mr. Charles a question there. I know you're talking about the load growth scenarios. What is standard load growth in 2026, 2027? I mean, what is standard for you guys?
Let's see, I think 2 ways to think about the question. One is, what is the company's official load forecast? And that is what we adopt as the standard view. is what has been happening the past few years standard or not is another question, and I don't know how we would answer that. But the standard view is the result of the company's approach to load forecasting, and so that's the product of the Mississippi Power effort at load forecasting. I don't know. Does that address the question?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the number, you mentioned number 600 early on as far as, low growth known. What about other anticipated or pending significant jumps in low growth? And what is the confidence of those, within the next or planning horizon that the IRP covers?
Right. So that is what we attempt to capture in the higher load growth view. It does not try to identify, maybe that customer is going to show up, or maybe it does not try to do that. Instead, it just says what happens if adopt the view that the customers that have shown up and that we're anticipating over the past few years of a high growth period, what happens if that period, we're not out of that period and it lasts for longer. And so, again, it's not specific on identifying particular customers that might show up or what kind of customer or where they would be or anything like that. It's just asking, I think, exactly the question you're asking, which is, well, what if it lasts longer? What if there are more customers that show up? How does that affect, is that a big deal? Is it a small deal? How does it affect how we might want to build the fleet?
And one more, I'll hush on the natural gas prices.
Yeah.
Is the price forecast Mississippi specific or is it Southern Company specific?
Yeah. So good question. The diagram that I showed is what we regard as the commodity price. So it's actually forecast for Henry Hub. When we do the modeling, it is a delivered price, and that is location specific for each facility. For the way for each existing facility. For anticipated new facilities is a more generic view, but the prices for each delivered prices are different from the commodity price.
Okay, I just wasn't sure, given the different companies certainly have different purchasing programs and how that's reflected in this. Well, I appreciate it. I'll hush.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank y'all.
All right. Any other comments, questions, input? All right. Thank y'all for coming. Ben, do you want to have any closing remarks or housekeeping comments? Okay. Thanks. Well, if you haven't signed in, be sure to sign in the back. And we thank you for coming and attending. This concludes our workshop.